Yeah, thank you. And I think we had not talked about our presentations, but I think my presentation will follow very nicely Neil's because it's kind of a counterexample of the topics he mentioned. Can we put the presentation, please?
We both come from countries that enjoy dancing, that's why.
We have many things in share that we share. So I guess the title of my presentation was following the title of the conference, Does Money Matter? And I think, yes, it matters, as in real life, but it doesn't buy you happiness. You need to do a million other things in order to really be able to achieve, as was the case and what I'm going to present here. I'm going to go over how we build a structure around the MDGs in order to finance them, be able to achieve our targets or not, and how they had an impact or not in our normal policy making and budgeting strategies. So 6 points that I want to talk about. MDGs were just one element of Colombia's development strategy. And I think that is very important, and it talks about ownership, and it talks about how does a country that it's already in a development path with the strategies embrace these opportunities, because we saw it, let's say, as an opportunity. Second, Colombia formulated its own policies on how to achieve the goals, and we did it with a document Conpes, and I'll talk about the document Conpes and what it means. Third, specific responsibilities were mainstreamed across government. You need to have accountability in order to be able to try to achieve goals as back then, the MDGs, which I think is much easier than what we are talking now about the SDGs. I think in the SDGs world, there's a lot of coordination that will have to happen inside government, within different levels of governments, with private sectors, and I think that requires an institutionality and a capacity to make this coordination that is difficult to achieve. Fourth, financing was linked to the strategies and the MDGs, and in the case of Colombia, own resources were the main source of financing. Obviously, you are talking about a middle-income country, which is different to what most of the 2 days we have been talking about, which is low-income countries. But at the end, a budget is a budget. And as Neil was mentioning, there are some principles that I think any country should try to follow regardless of the sources of revenue. On fifth place, MDGs were mainstreamed into national strategies, but they shared priority with other strategies. They never displaced our main priorities. Obviously, we had an education policy, we had a health policy, we had many. So it was not that they were totally delinked, but they never became our main goal or objective. And six, policies, quantitative targets, and monitoring were essential. And I end up with a question of whether did it work, and has the homework finished in terms of MDG. And I had prepared a presentation of, it's funny because I also chose education for Colombia. I don't think I will have time to go through it, but I leave it there in the PowerPoint. And in the right, you had some basic information that I assume you read while I was speaking. This is Colombia today, very different to Colombia in 1999 when I started in the Ministry of Finance. I think it's a good story of a transformation, a country that was facing enormous challenges that still faces challenges. But I guess the message I like to deliver is, if you do the homework, you get there. It's more or less. So first point, MDGs were just one element of Colombia's development strategy. And for us was more an input in the design of development and sector strategies, public policies, financing plans, and allocation of resources and M&E frameworks. So we already had some in place, but this forced us to really think about baseline, really think about indicators, really see, we had a way of, and that's point number 2, to benchmark ourselves with other countries. And when you are in government and you are trying to put objectives, this allowed us to have some objectives to try to reach it. So it allowed it. I really think it had a very positive impact in terms of policy making, in terms of strategy coordination, and in terms of seeing first that our policies were well oriented, because as was mentioned yesterday, the MDGs were signed or announced, and then the other day governments wake up and say, okay, fine, now what? Nothing has changed. But what we saw is the Colombia's priorities of that moment were well aligned with what the world were thinking were priorities in terms of poverty reductions and improving conditions of people. It allows Colombia something very important, which was one way of assessing regional disparities. Colombia is a country of regions, and there are enormous differences and inequalities between regions. So we moved one step forward and we started to do MDGs at the regional level. Let's say we tried to compare how regions were doing in each of these indicators. So it was as I say, a tool for better policy making and budget allocation. It also allows us to invite the private sector and NGOs into policy making and financing. You open the communication and you tell private sector you have a role to play, you tell NGOs you have a role to play under this setting in which we all have something to do. And finally, all that process, because in 2000 started this, but we only produced the document setting targets and strategies in March 2005. It doesn't mean that we didn't work during those periods in these issues, but there was a lot of trying to achieve consensus, trying to build baseline information that was one of the shocks, that we didn't have the information. So you needed to produce baseline, and also because this was work with the UN, basically with the UN agencies in Colombia, and also the multilateral banks, and you saw that our information was very weak, and that basically was very weak, was not good quality, and not enough. So there was a lot of effort to produce the baseline in order to know what was it that we were going to measure. And since we were talking about 15 years, that allowed you, because you don't have to build an indicator and starting to measure in 6 months. You have to build an indicator in which you prepare the information. So, as I said, on 2005, on 2005, Colombia issued document Conpes 91, which is called Targets and Strategies for Achieving the MDGs. Documentos Conpes in Colombia are a very important policy tool and a very important allocation of resources tool. Conpes is the National Council for Economic and Social Policy, which is led by the president of the country, of the Republic of Colombia. The technical secretariat is Planeación, DMP, which is the institution that I led, and it has the intervention of all the ministers that are related to that policy. So once a document is submitted, it has recommendations, and those recommendations have to be followed by whoever is in that. And I stress this because that I find one tool that Colombia has that is very important. The ability to coordinate, to make decisions, to take recommendations, allocate accountabilities, assign resources. So the document basically said that this was going to be mainstreamed in the National and Territorial Development Plan, and that sectors had to adjust their strategies, and that the financing was responsibility of the national, regional, and local governments. Basically, all of that was what's in the document, linked to ministries of agencies. Like the Ministry of Education was the owner of MDG 2, Planeación was the owner of MDG 1, poverty reduction. Strategies and policies were modified in the document. Baseline information was presented, indicators developed, and finances need identified in that document. And this table shows how it was calculated, how much was going to cost in 2000, what we thought was the cost of achieving the MDGs. And basically, you had it, the table shows it by MDG, but what you can see is mainly the main source of revenue was the national budget that included taxes and debt. In debt, we have internal, external, and in external, you have markets and multilateral loans. So basically, it's how the budget, it's like a screenshot of the budget in sources and where it's going to go. Given that education and health are decentralized in Colombia, responsibilities of states and municipalities, regions had to play a key role because they are the ones who are delivering in those goals. Private sector played a role, and there was a very small reliance on international cooperation. International cooperation in a small definition, because, and that's why I start, multilateral loans were very important, but it's a loan, it's not a direct ODA. They have been mainstreamed into the national policies, and I had here the two national development plans, the plan for 2006-10 and the one for 10-14. As in the pink color, you have the pillar that is related to the MDGs, but it's much broader than the MDGs. And it's so by mainstream, I mean there's reference, the indicators are part of the National Development Plan, but it's only one of the important information that is there. Since targets were produced and indicators were calculated, there has been a permanent monitoring of the goals. And that all can be seen on internet. So two last slides, did it work? And that I looked on internet is a study of a working paper of 2010 of the Center for Global Development, in which they were doing for all the countries how they were doing in the MDGs. So Colombia, you see it there. 8 is you are doing very well. I think it's like a 7 or 6 or something. This was measures at 2010. So it seems that we were doing well in terms of the MDG. But is the homework finished? No. There's a lot to be done in Colombia, and there's a list there of problems. We are the 7th most unequal country in the world, most affected by natural disasters, large regional disparities, 2nd largest number of displaced people in the world. Only Syria is higher than Colombia. Reintegration of paramilitaries, peace process, all of this is related to the MDGs. So yes, we achieve it, we are in green, but we have a million challenges. And finally, I was looking yesterday to see what happened with the happiness of Colombia, and I always, every now and then, there's a happiness index, and Colombia always ranks very high in terms of survey, and they always say that they ask the wrong people. But this is the one that I found that it's basically with data, and it seems that Colombia ranked number 3 out of 151 in 2012, which I think is pretty high. But the message is, going back, I think it's a combination of strategies, policies, financing, and doing the homework permanently. So it's a lot of technocrats trying to work for achieving those goals. Thank you.